So, as introduced, today I'm going to try and give you a little bit of information and some mainly like 10 tips on communication and presentation skills. Because from my experience, also from looking at students and what they're doing during their degree, but also beyond their degree when they're doing when they're in their jobs, in their new positions, a lot of marine biology work does entail having to speak to people. And this is both in terms of speaking to the public, for example, or also speaking to a more academic audience. So we're going to go through some of the do's and don'ts and good practice in communication. So we'll start from a lot of blah, blah, blah from me when it comes to going through the top 10 tips of presentation and public speaking. Then I had designed a little, a short interactive exercise as I was going to put all of the people in the audience in pairs together in breakout rooms, but I'm not 100% sure if that's going to work out because we need to, I don't know if Zoom is going to allow, but the plan was to get everybody thinking about how to create a bit of an elevator pitch. So maybe instead of doing it in breakout rooms, we can still take 5-10 minutes for each of you to create an elevator pitch, and maybe some of you will feel comfortable presenting it, but even if you don't feel comfortable presenting it, that's okay. You can still maybe tell me a bit about what you've experienced and any feedback that you have when it comes to creating this sort of presentation, even for a short amount of time. So it was a little bit funny because obviously as I was creating my presentation, obviously the first thing that we want to know when we're preparing our presentation is knowing your audience. So we need to understand who we're going to be speaking in front of, who is going to be receiving our message. And so it is our job to then use this information to tailor the content to their interest, knowledge levels, and also their needs. So are you going to be standing in front of a group of academics? Are you going to be standing in front of the public? If it is the public, are they going to be adults? Or are they going to be children? And so this is that's like the first step that we need in order to tailor and create our presentation. So obviously I didn't know who I was going to have in front of me today. So what I have done, I have created a poll everywhere that will allow me to get some information from you in order for me to understand the kind of experience that you have in public speaking. So hopefully, if you scan the QR code with a phone or any other mobile device that you have, I've activated the questions. Hopefully, let me know if it works. I'm always a little bit technology is always a little bit of a question mark, and we love it and we hate it. So let's see if it works. And oh, excellent. So something is coming in. So the idea is to try and have an idea as to how much experience you'll have in the audience. That way I can hopefully try and tailor my presentation towards your experience. I think there's 15 in the audience, is that right?
I think we have 21 participants.
Oh, now 21 now. Okay, good.
Yeah.
Last time I counted was 15, so there might have been a few more that joined. I'm just going to give it another minute and see if we can get a few more answers in. So far, it seems that most have reasonable experience and feeling quite confident, which is good. It's definitely good to see. So hopefully, at this point, some of these tips will be reminders of good practice, but hopefully there will be some information in there that maybe you hadn't thought about before, you haven't heard before. And I find that either way, learning new things is also very important, but also getting a reminder that what we're doing is good practice. I find that that's equally important. So we'll see how we go. Perfect. I'll keep that open for now. And then I've got another one later on. So now that I know a little bit more about my audience, I can hopefully tailor the presentation a little bit more. So the second important step when you are creating a presentation or when creating, a topic to talk about to either the public or an academic audience, it depends, but it's still very important to have a clear objective. So you need to have a clear idea in mind as to what it is what the purpose of your presentation is and what you want your audience to learn or take away from the presentation, or maybe what you want them to do after the presentation. So most of the time, this is going to be reflected in your title potentially, but it's also very important to spell it out. So having like an outline, for example, can be quite helpful at the beginning. Not only you're providing an idea of what's coming, what your audience can expect, but it also gives you an opportunity to reiterate what the objective of your presentation is going to be. So in this case, we'd be spelling out the idea that we want to provide some good tips, some good do's and don'ts of what to do in presentations. I find that it's really, really important to set the scene of your presentation. So to provide an engaging opening. And it's really, really hard to pinpoint what this could be because it really depends on what the topic of your presentation is and also what the reason for your presentation is and who the audience is going to be. So it's good to start with a strong opening to grab your audience attention. So if you had an academic audience in front of you, you would probably want to make sure that your presentation has got a strong title, something that will captivate their experience. When I give presentations to my students, even at the beginning of each of my lectures, or when we give presentations to the public, I always like to start them with some sort of fun fact. The fun fact could be relevant to their experience. So for example, when we did a presentation about the kelp project for the public that lives in and around Sussex, we started the presentation by showing them an image that you can see here on the slide of how much kelp there used to be back in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s. And that should hopefully freshen up their memory and should hopefully they can hopefully think back to that time and hopefully like a happy time that then gets compared to a lack of kelp that we're unfortunately experiencing nowadays. When I give lectures to my students, I again also like to start from a surprising fact or a fun fact, and these are a couple of examples that I've used recently. So one of them was a paper that sort of confirmed that sharks can sleep, which is something that we all kind of knew somewhat, but we didn't have strong evidence. And now we do actually have strong laboratory evidence that sharks can conserve energy that is characteristic of what we could be defining as sleep. And another one that I've also used recently is the fact that we have now discovered a new species of hammerhead shark in Florida. And unfortunately, this fun fact was also accompanied by the notion that despite the fact that we didn't know that the species was around, it's probably already quite critically endangered because of how much they get fished out and how much they get targeted in this area. So most of the time, when we do talk about marine biology, hopefully the fun facts are quite fun and exciting, but unfortunately, sometimes they're going to be carrying some said part of it. But that's just part of the game and part of why we're in the world that we're in. In addition to providing a clear objective to your talk and starting the talk with something that will hopefully engage your audience, it's also extremely important to make sure that your presentation is organized in a way that it's logical, in a way that it has got a clear beginning, a middle, and an end. And it's organized and it makes sense so the audience can understand each and every step that you're presenting to them without jumping too much back and forth. Again, having an outline at the beginning helps keeping your content logical and organized. I also find that it's really helpful to give meaningful titles to the slides. So you might have seen maybe in the past before when you have like a presentation in front of you that has introduction, methods, results, and that's not very informative. So it's quite nice to have, meaningful titles in there. What is it about the introduction that you're talking about? What is it about your methods that you're reviewing? What results are you presenting? And so you can summarize that in your title. And one important aspect of presenting that is really key is making sure that you go through a quick summary of the content every so often. So every few slides is good to reiterate the message that you want your audience to take away from your presentation. So it doesn't necessarily have to feel like too much repetition, but it's good to tie everything together. So for example, at the end of each section of your presentation, whether this is a particular topic or whether it is your introduction and your methods and your discussion, you just make sure to summarize it, and that allows your audience to really follow up and really take away the important messages. So this is something that you might have seen before, especially if you have written research articles or if you've done presentations about a research project, for example. It's this idea of the hourglass. That's how I like it to call it. So the introduction usually starts from broad, from how do we embed the project or the topic in the broader aim. So why do we care about our project? Why are we here? Why we spent all that money, all that time, all that effort collecting that data? And then we slowly walk our reader or our audience to our main point, which most of the time is probably going to be some sort of research question. And then or the key, again, the key of what we want the audience to take away from our presentation. And then we're going to be spending a reasonable amount of time on the body of the presentation, which again could be different section based on what it is that you're presenting. And then in your discussion, you're going to be moving again from the specifics of your topic all the way again to the bigger picture. So you're following this idea of the hourglass. So just looking at, again, some examples, although I was a little bit ahead of myself, potentially just already providing some information about the various sections. I just wanted to give a quick example of, what a presentation to an academic audience would look like if you were to present a research project. So for example, you might have done your master's degree, or you might be working on your PhD, or even as a third-year student, you might have to present your research project either at a conference or for an assignment. It really varies. It really depends. But generally, beyond having a good title page with probably your name on it and an outline of what your talk is going to look like, you're then going to want to go into the introduction. So setting the scene for your project. So you're going to want to cover topics like what is it that we already know about the topic, and you're going to be providing some peer-reviewed research that is usually recommended in order to support the message that you're conveying to your audience. What is it that we know about the topic? Are there any gaps? So within the information that we do have, is there something that we don't have? Is there something that we don't understand, that we don't know yet? And you're gonna setting up these gaps in a way to show yourself as the person that is going to be filling those gaps. So because of what we know about the topic and because of what we don't know about the topic, then I am going to be providing you with a summary of the research project that fills the gaps that you have identified. And then you're going to be ending your introduction at that smallest point when it comes to your research question. So what is it that you actually were looking for when it comes to the project? So again, I always recommend using peer-reviewed research, so that primary research that you would have read and you would have hopefully understood, and then you're using in order to support the messages that you're going to convey. At this point in time, none of us really ever will become absolute experts on all sorts of topics of information that is out there. So we do rely on the findings, on the opinions of other people who are experts in their field, and we use their opinion, their expertise in order to support the message that we want to provide. And I find that it's also very helpful for the audience to have a reference at the bottom of the slide. It can be short, it can be just the last name, the date, and maybe the shorter version of the journal. I find that that works a lot better compared to having like a big literature cited page at the end of your presentation, because it's it's quite tricky for the audience to remember where they saw a paper that might be of interest for them. So I find that having it on this slide is actually quite a lot more helpful. When we'll move on from the introduction to the methods, so always a reminder that methods need to be detailed enough in order to help somebody replicate your study, and it shouldn't be a diary account of what's been done. So it's not something like, on day 1 I went on the boat, on day 2 we dropped the brevs, on day 3 we collected eDNA. That's not necessarily what the methods are about. But if you think about yourself at the beginning of your field season, at the beginning of your field study, and you need to have some sort of notes in front of you to know how to do your study. This is what the methods are going to look like. How long does the survey take? Where are you going to go? How are you going to find your site? Do you have your brevs? What do the brevs have in them? Do you need cameras? Do you have the fish? Do you have the bait? What's the bait, etc., etc.? Do you have everything that you need in order to collect your eDNA samples, for example? And it's important to have enough information. Providing a map sometimes can be really helpful in order to show the audience where you've been, where you're planning on going, for example. It gives a good idea of your sample size, so how much replication is in your study. And we know that the greater the replication, the stronger your research study is going to be, or the more trustworthy that your data are going to look like. So, if you've only been to 1 or 2 places, some people might have some questions. If you've been to 28 places, like we do, for example, for the KELP project, then you know that you can start really trusting your results. You're probably going to want to explain the statistical analyses that you have run in order to address the research questions. But even this section is extremely important, and we want to try and stay away from just the pure statsiness of things. That's what I like to call it. It isn't just the test that is important. It isn't just about running a GLM, running a t-test, running an ANOVA. That's not really the key. The key is to explain to the audience what it is that you have done. So what are the variables that you've used? Are you looking for differences? Are you looking for relationship? Are you looking at an effect of a variable on the other? And how does that relate back to your research question? So again, remember this idea of summarizing every so often the information that you want the audience to take away in order to allow them to follow everything that comes after what you've just said. It's really good to use your own pictures and the diagram, but make sure to annotate them to help the audience follow along, because it's really hard just to remember what you've seen unless you've got specific things that are popping up on the slides. Your result section is going to provide some of the trends that you found in your data. Again, remember to connect the analysis and the statistical results again back to the original questions. A little bit of repetition here is actually very good. And again, stay away from the statsiness of things. So don't worry too much about significant here, significant there. Just looking at the trends. What is it that you found? Were there more species outside the trawling by law? Were there more species inside the trawling by law? Where was your, I don't know, Shannon Weiner biodiversity index telling you that actually there's more species outside compared to inside the trawling by law? So remember the importance of focusing on trends. Providing graphs is always a good idea, because it's a lot better than providing a sentence that states the trend that you found. So if you can provide a graph and you're labeling the graph appropriately with your x-axis and your y-axis, and then don't forget to engage with the graph that you have provided. So don't just expect the audience to have a look at a bar chart and understanding what you're presenting. So remember, like, the x-axis shows this, the y-axis shows that, and this is the trend that we have found that is supported by significant statistical results. The discussion is one of a key section of the study, and it will allow you to reiterate again what it is that you discovered, what are the trends, and what do they mean. So that's when we are going to start interpreting the information that the results that you found. It's important to also address some caveats and limitations and potentially areas for improvement. Something that we see fairly often, especially in students, is that that the focus is so much on the limitations that they almost completely disregard the importance of the study. So it's always important to think of it as like, despite the limitation X and Y, then we can still support A and B. So despite the fact that, bruvs might only attract species that are carnivorous species that are attracted by the bait, we can still use it in order to have an idea of what kind of species and the biodiversity that is in an area. So in a way, you're trying to preempt any sort of question that could come at the end and be like, oh, I have a question. Well, why did you do this? Why did you do that? Because obviously that doesn't work. So you're trying to preempt this thing. You're like, well, despite the fact that, I'm aware that my study is not perfect. No study is ever going to be perfect. I'm still confident in my data because I've done my research, because I based it on good scientific principles. And then, so this is when we start going back out towards the bottom of the hourglass. So then we need to start thinking big again. So how do your results relate back to the bigger picture? How can the findings be explained by existing theories and ideas? And does your work suggest something bigger that needs studying? So almost like, in addition to maybe some like future studies that you might want to do again, or you might want to suggest, but also what is the take-home message? I'm always a big fan of summary slides at the end, again, just to provide a reiteration of what it is that you have presented them. So you could already have something, again, a little bit of your intro, reminding the audience of your methods, what the main trends that you found and what these mean, and what it is that you would like for them to take away from your presentation. This is somewhat similar, but also somewhat different. So this was a presentation that we give on the research project, but to the public. So this is, again, was about the kelp restoration project, that presentation that we give to the public at Café Scientifique here in Brighton. So obviously when you have the public in front of you rather than an academic audience, your spin on your presentation has to be a little bit different, and you can expect them to have certain understanding of certain more simple things in a way, but they might not understand all of the various ecological principles that your study might rely on. So it really is important to maybe park the science to one side just for a little moment and remember to make the topic relevant to the audience. So the way that I did it, again, everybody can go for a walk on the sea, but I wanted to remind the audience of not only how important the ocean is for us, but also how beautiful and diverse the ocean is. So I presented them with a series of images and unique examples in order to captivate their interest. So I started from showing them pictures that I was lucky enough to take. This was about sharks, for example, or about dolphins and those charismatic species that lots of people are familiar with and they enjoy listening to and maybe looking at. I then presented a video of an octopus changing color in order to show how beautiful the ocean can be. And I then showed them a video from YouTube about orcas hunting to show them again how exciting the marine environment can be. And then I wasn't worrying about being too obvious. It's something, we're in marine science, so for us it's obvious that the ocean is a beautiful place, and it's obvious that we love it and that we want it to be healthy, and we know that a healthy ocean looks like a biodiverse ocean, or something like a complex 3D structure. But the public might not understand, might not know these ahead of time. Some might do, some might, and some might not. So it's important not to be too worried about being obvious. But again, the key here is to still convey the information with passion. You still want to provide information about where the problem is. So again, why are you here? Why are you talking to them? Why have you taken an evening out of their week for them to come around and listen to you? So what is the problem? And for this, you can use science. It's really, I find that is also still very powerful. So most of the public will understand, the use of other research in order to support what you're saying. And if you have recent references, that's even better. So if you can show that it has been like a recent research study in 2022 or 2023 or 2020 that is supporting whatever problem you're discussing, that I find that to be really really, really powerful. And then remind them again how the problem affects everyone, not just nature. And on some level, that's quite of an easy job that we have, because people and nature are so connected together that it's not hard to try and find a way to make any problem relevant to the person in front of you. And it doesn't matter if you're working locally, if you're working internationally, there something is still going to be you're going to be able to find a way to connect it and make it relevant to them. And remember again the importance of explaining what it is that you want your audience to learn or do after your presentation. And the public is particularly keen with knowing what it is that they can do. So you're still, if you're presenting about, again, a research project like we did for the KEL project, we still wanted to explain how we collected our data, but at that point, the audience won't need to recreate your study. So it's okay to keep it simple, and it's okay to even make it look like a little bit more of like, well, we've done this, so almost like a list of things that we have done. And I find it really helpful to use real life examples to explain how things work. So this is an example that was used by our PhD student on the project to try and to explain how environmental DNA works. It's the idea of it's like a soup with a bunch of like letters in it. I'm sure that he's got a better name in English that I can't necessarily think of. But the idea is that you've got all of these letters, and this letter is going to be identifying a species. So if you're collecting a sample from this soup of letters, then each letter is going to be is going to suggest that that species is present in the area that you're serving. So it's a really easy way to get the public to understand how some of our scientific methods work. Even more important here to have videos of images of what you did. So we had a video of how we deployed the brubs, how we picked them up, videos of what we saw underwater, and then videos of how we collected the eDNA and what the output of the eDNA then looks like. So again, they can relate to the project, they can relate to the importance of the project. The results is going to be key here as well. At this stage, you probably, again, depending on who the audience is, if it is the public, you might not really want to worry about your statistical analyses, because it's likely that they might not be familiar with it. But you can still explain the trends. You can still explain, we found more species here, we found less species there. This particular species was found in this area, not in that area. And reminding them again what it is that that you wanted to achieve. So we're trying to investigate if you're trying to understand if the trawling by law is having an effect on the community that lives along the Sussex coast. And we can understand this by comparing, the number of species or the number of organisms that are outside the trawling by law or inside the trawling by law or over time. And they're perfectly able to understand this. If you've got some graphs, you can definitely present some graphs, but again, it's maybe moving away from the typical bar chart. You can provide something that is a little bit more informative. So again, our PhD student had quite a good Venn diagram that was showing, the amount of species that was captured by brubs and the amount of species that was captured by DNA, with lots of different little pictures that were explaining what of the different organisms are, and public can easily relate to this information. Your discussion is still going to go over what you discovered and what your results mean, and often the public is going to ask whether your results are good or bad. So we always get the question, the paper that we publish is showing that we found 81 different species in 2021, which was our baseline when the trawling by law first was first included. So that's a representation of a very degraded habitat. And they will ask, well, is 81 species good? Is 81 species bad? The reality is never that simple. So it's important for us to remind the public that answers to our questions are never that simple. And we know that we do have 81 different species, and then we're now left to observe whether this is going to change or not over time in response to the trawling by law, reminding them that, again, it's not just one thing that is usually causing a degraded ecosystem. It's not just the trawling, it's not just the fishing. There's probably going to be some pollution, increases surface temperature, etc. So we're just left with a very, very challenging question. remind them again what the take-home message is, so what it is that you want them to take away from your study. And then another very, very powerful aspect of a presentation to the public is to kind of remind them if there's anything that they can do. So we had anything, from reminding them that, the health of the ocean starts from your sink inside your house and from your toilet, because, we're all connected. At some point, the water that we're using in our house is going to end up into the sea. To making sure to make like good choices when it comes to what products to buy, like what fish to buy or not to eat fish, or maybe eating a little bit less. In addition to the power that we have sometimes to fill out any sort of community engagement strategies also from Sussex IFCA. So they're going to be asking the public, do you support the trawling by law? Do you not support the trawling by law? And they will listen. So we can definitely engage the public in this way. And they might not know that this is a possibility. So it's good to remind them that everybody can help all the time. Summary slide again, big fan, to just kind of like re-summarize everything that you've told them, and they're going to remember. They're going to remember you not only for the content that you've given them, but also for how well you've explained, and also for how passionate you were while explaining the topic. And hopefully you are talking about something that you're passionate about. It doesn't often happen. Sometimes I don't necessarily enjoy talking about stats, but again, I still try to make it relevant, and to make it, try to use examples that I am passionate about, just so that nobody that falls asleep halfway through the lecture, which unfortunately still happens. So because obviously we're making a presentation, top tip number 5 is to use visual aids. Using charts and videos to support the message is always quite important. Ensuring that they're clear, relevant, and not overloaded with information. So we do have this problem quite a lot, and on some level I'm actually a little bit guilty about it at this moment, when having too many words on the slides. When I give lectures, when I give presentations, I mainly have just pictures and videos of things on my slides. I might have like a few sentences here and there with like some key messages, but we definitely want to move away from slides that are so crowded with words. Text font should be a minimum of 24, and that allows everybody, even in the back, to be able to see the slides and to be able to read. Animation. Oh, there we go. Don't know what that. Oh yeah, so having too many words on the slides, between 10 and 20. So this is an example of what not to have when you've got so many words, and it's difficult for the audience to read the text while listening to you, and you don't want to create this disparity when it comes to getting them reading too quickly. Maybe you haven't gotten there, and obviously you're not going to have all of the information on the slide, so they might get to a point without a key information that you're providing to them. So just always remember to have the fewer words, the better sometimes. What do I have here? Oh, yes. It seems like, yeah, see, number 5 is animations can be good, but avoid going overboard, and also make sure to check them, because sometimes if they are not working properly, then they're actually working against you, just like in this case. So what I had here is an example of how animations can just become too much. When you've got things appearing, when you've got something flying in, something else is just checkering out, and then, this is appearing again, and then something is just like, flying into it in another way, then it just becomes a little bit too much. So animations can be good, especially if you want to focus the attention of the audience on a particular message or on a particular graph, on a particular figure that you're providing to them. Absolutely go for it, but try not to go overboard, and definitely check them before you give your presentation, so you don't end up like me right now. There are some excellent tools that now we have when it comes to trying to engage the audience, so that again we move a little bit further away from this one way blah 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 from one person to the next. It's a little bit of a trial and error sometimes, especially when it comes to technology. So we've got things like Poll Everywhere that you've already used. I absolutely love Kahoot, especially when I've got students in the audience, because they'll answer the question so they can test their understanding, and they'll also be able to get on a podium, so sees who wins, who is given the greatest number of correct answers, doing it faster. So that's really nice to engage the audience. I found that with the public, actually having this whole technology didn't work as well as I was hoping. And it was easy enough to just ask them questions. I was like, how many, even just at the beginning of the presentation, like, well, how many species do you think we found in 2021? And then we had all sorts of crazy numbers coming at us. And I was like, can you think of any species that we might have found? Because some of them, some were fishermen, some were divers, so they would have known. Some just you knew because they like the ocean. And so that can be that simple just by asking questions. And that way you encourage participation. What is it? Oh yeah, so Padlet walls are also really, really powerful, I find, which is something that, it depends on who you're talking to and how comfortable with technology they are. But especially if you're hosting, an exercise, just like maybe we might be able to do at the end today. If you don't have time for everybody to provide the feedback, then they just can type it up and they can share it with everybody else and everybody can read it. I find it's also very powerful for those in the audience who don't feel up for speaking out loud, and that's absolutely fine, but they still might want to participate. And so even if they don't fancy giving the answer out loud, they can write it up on a Padlet wall, or on a word cloud on Pearl Everywhere. So we've got these tools, and they can be great. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. So something to also keep in mind. I also find that if there's anything that you can use to like lighten the mood, did anything funny happen? And if you've done any field work, there was likely to be some funny stories, because field work always has something going wrong. And it doesn't have to be from field work, it can be from any of your experiences. It could be from the time that you slipped on the beach on a piece of kelp that then smudged all over your shoes, and that's absolutely fine. But I find that that's also quite nice. Oh yeah. Engagement with audience continued. I think I have a few of these. Avoid reading from notes, avoid reading from notes, and avoid reading from notes. I cannot stress the importance enough of avoid reading from notes. And it doesn't look great. And it also actually makes your presentation less effective. And the second that you lose where you are in your notes, and then you're lost, and then you don't know what it is, and then you don't forget, and you're getting lost again, and then you be even more bit in a panic because you know that you've lost yourself. So definitely avoid reading from notes. That's extremely important. And again, depending on the reason why you're giving a presentation, hopefully it is about something that you're knowledgeable about. Hopefully it is about something that you're passionate about. So channel that passion, channel that knowledge, and trust the fact that you are able to provide a presentation on a topic that you are knowledgeable about without having to read from notes. And be strategic with the information that you do put on the slides, because those can be helpful not just for the audience but also for yourself, and that way you don't need notes at all. Also quite important, avoid reading from the slides. So you don't want, today's a little bit different because obviously you don't see me standing in front of the audience, but if you've got the slides behind you, you don't want to spend the whole time looking at the slides, right? You do want to make sure that you're looking at your audience. This doesn't mean that you couldn't like point things out. Again, if you have a graph, you do want to show that this is the x-axis, this is the y-axis, and that's absolutely fine. But we don't want to just sit there and completely read from notes and avoid all eye contact with the audience, because that still doesn't make up a good presentation. In order to be able to avoid reading from the slides and avoid reading from your notes, nothing is more important than practice. Practice, 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 practice. The likelihood is that you're going to have to rehearse your presentation multiple times, and practice will help you become familiar with your content and then automatically reduce the anxiety. The reality is that, we all feeling a little bit anxious about talking to people. I've been doing this for now 4 years. I was doing presentations beforehand, and I feel maybe a little bit more comfortable now when I'm talking to students, because maybe I know most of them, and so that's fine. But if I was to give a presentation to during a conference, knowing that people in the audience might be even more expert than me on the topic, that would make me feel definitely a little bit anxious. But if I am comfortable with the presentation, if I'm comfortable with the topic, if I'm comfortable with what I want to say, then I can overcome some of that anxiety, which is still not the same as completely memorizing your pitch, because that also can create some trouble. So sometimes you might want to think about memorizing maybe your first sentence, and again, that gives you some confidence with, knowing how you're going to continue on. But it's still, I still am not a huge fan about, the idea of memorizing your pitch, because again, the second that you miss that word that you knew that you wanted to say, then everything just becomes a little bit more of a mess because you don't know how to continue. So, have an idea of what you're going to say, help yourself with information that you have on the slides, but in a way, there's a little bit of winging behind this as well, and that's absolutely fine. Um, Good to time yourself, especially if you are something like a conference, at, I don't know, if you've got 10 minutes, at 9 minutes, they're going to be start knocking on the door. And then at 10 minutes, they're going to cut you off. So you don't want to risk not getting to the end of your presentation. So good to time yourself based on the amount of time that you know you're going to have, but also think that, on the day you will likely speak a little bit faster. I think as a rule of thumb, I usually provide, it should take about a minute to go through one slide. Some slides are going to be taking a little bit more, some slides are going to be taking a little bit less, but just by knowing the amount of time that you have available to you and creating like a similar amount of slides, that should give you a good idea of how long it's going to take you to give the presentation. But then practice and timing yourself. So familiarity provides you some freedom, and familiarity it might lead to poor performance, especially if you're already feeling a little bit worried on the day. But the reality is that everybody's going to feel the same way. Oh. Body language. Using positive body language is really important. I mean, I know that Ami might be a little bit extreme because I am Italian, so I'm going to be doing quite a lot of these and quite a lot of those, and I'm going to be walking around. I'm actually like struggling with a little bit of back pain at the moment when I stand, and I still cannot sit down while I give a lecture, so I'm still going to be walking up and down, and I'll do that through pain instead of sitting down, because I know that I wouldn't be able to deliver a lecture unless I was doing all of that. Now, I know this might be extreme. I think it actually got quite funny during lockdown. I realized that we were recording the lectures on Panopto. That's the software that we used. And there's usually like thumbnails of the videos, and every single thumbnail was me trying to do something different with my hands. So thankfully, then I found a way to go back and delete all of the thumbnails. So it was just the beginning of the slide, because that just started being a little bit embarrassing of me just doing all sorts of this when talking about, predators and lions and stuff. But it's really, again, it's just really, really important to make sure that you're presenting yourself in a good way. Maintaining eye contact, again, is important. Don't just like face and read from your notes or read from the slides, but don't forget to engage with the slide when you need to point out important things. Using gestures, again, I think that's probably like the one thing that I do quite a lot of, and move around the space if possible. And again, that just provides you a way of engaging with the audience. Sometimes I'm a little bit hard of hearing, so I might have to get closer to the audience, especially if I've asked them a question and they're responding from the back. But it is quite important. When practicing, oh yeah, that's something important, which also comes with practicing also the way that you're saying things. It's important to practice in front of the mirror. So for you to know what you look like, it's also very important when you are giving the presentation. But also it's good to practice to family and friends, and even more like if you're giving a presentation to the public, family and friends is the perfect way to practice. But also if you're giving more of a academic presentation, is still important for your family and friends to be able to understand. And so if they are unable to understand, then maybe there's something that you're missing with the information that you're providing. So the information that you're providing still has to be understandable by everybody in the audience, regardless of the background that they might have. So it doesn't matter if they're kelp experts or they're shark experts, they're still going to be able to understand what you're trying to communicate to them. So practicing also with family and friends, in addition, in front of the mirror, is really important. Voice control. It's good to vary your tone, your pitch, and your pace, again, to keep the audience engaged. Sometimes it doesn't matter how much you vary. You'll find that some are still already asleep. You see them, their head just like bumping down, and that's just a little bit funny. And, sometimes you can help it, sometimes you can't, and that's okay. Avoid speaking too fast. That was also something that I struggled with. I'm probably still speaking a little bit too fast. But, it's very, very important to try and slow down as much as possible, because otherwise it's going to sound like a little bit of blah, 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 with like, I still don't know what just hit me. You can use pauses for emphasis. Exactly. Avoid M. Really important. It actually can be quite annoying to keep hearing it all the time. Sometimes you can avoid it a lot more. Sometimes it's a little bit harder to avoid it. But I have heard even lecturers with a lot of experiences that will say 3 words and an M, and that becomes a bit too much. So, you can catch your thoughts. I find that if you slow down, that allows you to catch your thoughts even more. And so you're going to need a lot less of that M to try and fill the spaces between thought number one and thought number two. Some of them, again, are going to be necessary. The more that you practice, the less you're going to need it. And it just makes it of a better presentation. Questions. I think questions might be one of the parts of the presentations that most people dread the most. And it's because it might be on something that you're not prepared on. And that's absolutely fine. Even if there is some sort of the expectations that you are the perfect expert in the field, it's okay to admit that sometimes you don't know the answer to a question. It's still important to try and use the knowledge that you have in order to give a reasonable answer to the question that you've just been asked. When you're talking to the public, I find that it's also quite important to try and be a little bit careful with the message that you convey, because they're going to be taking it at heart. So, something like, well, what can I do in order to make the world a better place? Just try and be careful, because, you don't want them to leave with a level of anxiety that it comes with feeling empowered to be able to make a difference, but not feeling like every single thing that they're doing is actually causing a problem. So it's quite important to try and be relatively calm and relatively somewhat neutral also with the answers that you're providing. Listen to the questions carefully. If you didn't understand it, that's also okay. Again, I'm a little bit hard of hearing, so sometimes I need to ask them to come to answer me, to ask me again. If you don't know the answer, that's also okay. Maybe you can offer to follow up later. If you're at a conference, be like, oh, that's actually an excellent question. I haven't thought about it, but I'm going to think about it, and then maybe we can have a conversation later. But the likelihood is that you're going to be knowledgeable enough about the topic that even if you don't know the specific answer to that question, you can draw from the knowledge that you have in maybe like similar areas or a similar topic in order to provide a thoughtful enough answer that can satisfy the audience. But again, remembering that, especially when you're talking to the public, to try and be thoughtful about the answer that you're providing them with, because they're going to be taking it at heart. Right, so this is me in terms of the information that I wanted to provide about giving presentations. I don't know whether we have time or we can try to do this without being able to do breakout rooms. So the idea was to try and putting you from the audience together in pairs and creating a little bit of a pitch and then presenting to each other and then just kind of like seeing how you're feeling. But I know that I've taken almost an hour already. So maybe we just want to leave that for another day and I'm just taking some questions. Do you think that's probably a better plan?
Yeah, I think I think that's a good idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, as it's already been an hour, let's
Yes,
just stick to
exactly.
the
Yes,
questions if you're happy to
100%.
do with that.
Perfect. If you don't mind, I'm obviously very happy to take questions in the chat, or if you want to ask me, that's also absolutely okay. If you don't mind, again, I will bring up the second one of my polls. Again, this is just for internal use, just to see how you're feeling about things. So I'll activate this again, and it's going to give you like a kind of a similar question, is to see whether you're feeling a little bit more confident at all about having heard this presentation. I feel like the exercise might have been powerful about, again, feeling a little bit more comfortable, but either way is not a problem. And if you've got any feedback, I think you can questions. Hopefully you can access both the feedback answer and the poll. But otherwise, feel free to ask me any questions at the moment. I'll leave it might be helpful if I leave this open Oh, doesn't allow me to leave it open. Oh, maybe it does. Okay, cool.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I know people are typing away, but this is something I'm not in school anymore, thank God. But I was at one time, and I used to struggle quite a lot with group presentations. And I'm thinking if you have like any tips on potentially if there's some people in the call who are in at college or university and need to give group presentations because that does come up quite often, and I think it is quite tricky. Work, doing a presentation for one and then being in a group dynamic. So I wonder if you have any tips or ways of working in kind of a group setting because it's oftentimes you're not doing things on your own, especially in the beginning couple of years or when you're studying it. So
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, that's an excellent question. Obviously, group work comes with a lot of challenges, and in addition, even just the fact that automatically not everybody's going to be contributing the same to the work that you're doing. It doesn't matter if it's a presentation, a piece of work, it doesn't matter what it is. That there might be often case that you might have to pick up the slack that someone else is not doing. I In general, when it comes to group work, and then I'll maybe mention something about presentation specifically. I always say that this is a blessing in disguise because when we talk to our employers, all that they ask is that the person that they're interviewing would be able to provide examples of a challenge that they have lived through and how they managed to manage that challenge and how they managed to overcome the challenge. So I always say to my students, if everything goes well all the time, there's nothing you're going to be able to talk about. So, welcome the challenge sometimes when things don't go right, because it gives you the ability to develop those skills that you want in order to overcome the challenge. Because the reality is that not always people are going to contribute the way that they want to contribute. I find that it's important to be, and also when it comes to presentations, it's good to be clear ahead of from the beginning what each person is going to do. And some people will have better strength than others. Some people will feel slightly more comfortable when it comes to stats. Some people will feel slightly more comfortable when it comes to speaking. Some people will feel slightly more comfortable when it comes to creating the slides. Maybe they have got a good eye for for the artsy bits and maybe making sure to create good slides, and it's okay to distribute the tasks following a person's strengths. That's okay. When it comes to the delivery, what I recommend is try to avoid switching in between speakers too much. So you don't want to do like a slide each and then go back and then do another slide each and then go back and do a slide each. It's much better to, for each person to do a section and then just moving on to the next person, because otherwise it creates a little bit of contrast. And then again, practicing it together is really, really important, making sure that everybody, knows what they're talking about. Sometimes that's going to work a little bit better. Sometimes it's going to work a little bit less well. Based on the group that you work with. But again, it's a challenge that I think it's a good challenge to have, because otherwise there's nothing you're going to be able to talk about during an interview.
Thank you. I think that's good tips. It's definitely a blessing in disguise. I like how you framed that. It's very positive. So that's good.
Yeah, again, it's really, really key. Yeah, so I think always trying to find, the silver lining to all of the experience that you have, because everything is going to be important, everything is going to be key, and everything is shaping you the person that you are. So I think it's just really important to just try and make the most out of it, even of the situations that are frustrating. And the reality is that life is frustrating a lot of the time. So can't let it stop you.
Yeah. We have two questions in the chat. I can read them out if you like.
Yeah, for sure.
So we have one from Ren, which is you mentioned that you did work in Florida. Can you elaborate on what organizations I live there and want to get better connected? Do you have any socials that you post things like your presentation?
Right. So Florida for me was specifically about my undergraduate degree. So I did my marine biology degree at Florida Institute of Technology in 2009, which feels a long time ago. So unfortunately, I don't necessarily have that many contacts yet because it has been a while. But something that I've been telling all of my students is the power of LinkedIn. So I don't know whether you're on LinkedIn already or not, but the amount of things that I'm discovering from LinkedIn is enormous. There's also a couple of Facebook groups that specifically post about jobs, I think, but they still have got opportunities. Something like marine. I can have a quick look. I can't quite think of the names yet, but it's like, oh, let me have a quick look.
Women in Ocean Science runs
Yes, that would be one of them, yeah.
yeah,
And
we run the marine
biology and
internships,
marine
opportunities and
biology
jobs.
network, job postings, and marine biology career network. I find that both of them are quite good, because they find, there's quite a lot of people that live in this place, that live all over the place. And if you are part of those groups, feel free to just post, just post just post a question and be like, this is where I live. Is there anything that I can um get involved with and get connected? But I find that both these platforms are really useful. I find, universities will have quite a lot of like bulletin boards and job boards and stuff. So if you are living in a specific area around a specific university, it's really good to have a look at. And then I think just, yeah, Google in general is quite good. Depending on where you are, you can always try and find it. I know that there's like lots of turtle research as well. There's the shark research in the University of Miami. So that would be my advice. We're trying to get your hands dirty as much as you can, really. Get involved in anything.
Awesome. And then we have another question from Kavitha. Says, thanks for the live presentation. Yes, thank you. And any tips on making a presentation not sound boring and monotonous, especially if you're not a big talker?
Practice. I don't think there's any way around practicing it, and it's practicing it to yourself and practicing it to your friends and family, but also just going through the presentation itself. And the more that you do it and the more confident that you become, then the better that it's automatically going to be. And I find, again, in a way to try and shift the perspective again with my students. Oh, I'm always a little bit worried about giving the presentation about my project. I'm like, well, think of it as like, finally you get the chance of talking about the things that you love. You've obviously worked on this project for 6 months, so it's your baby, it becomes your thing. So why do you love it? Like, reminding yourself that you absolutely love what you're doing. And again, sometimes it's not like that. Again, when I'm presenting about stats, it's not like that's something I absolutely love doing. But I remember the importance of knowing that information as well. So practicing and practicing and practicing, it's always really important. Trying to shift the perspective of, like, obviously it can be a little bit, scary to be standing in front of people, but remembering that, you're hopefully talking about something that you're passionate about, and finally comes the moment when you can talk to them about it. I can't wait to give lecture, because it takes me away from emailing all day long and being in front of my computer. Like, finally I can go and see my students, talk to them about something cool that I've been able to that I've done, or some topic that that I know that I'm passionate about. Sometimes I don't care about stats that much, although we do need to care, and that's okay. But we get to, how do we apply stats for a project that we're passionate about and we love? And I find that that's quite helpful. But yeah, practicing is key, and it's always going to get better. Stick to it.
I don't think there's any other questions in the chat, but I'm quickly going to answer a question that I got directly, just in case anyone missed it at the start. So these workshops are recorded and they will be uploaded to YouTube within a couple of days, hopefully, normally, but my Wi-Fi is not great, so sometimes I attempt to do it and it won't upload it. So I will obviously post about it on our socials when it is uploaded. If possible, Valentina, would you be able to send me the presentation or upload it to a Google Drive or something like that? And then I can include a link for it in the description of the YouTube, so people
I
have.
wouldn't I can probably send it to you via email, because I don't think it's going to be that big of a file. Yeah, that's
perfect.
absolutely fine.
Cool.
Yeah, of course.
And then if anyone has any other questions, then obviously feel free you can come off mute and ask your question or drop it in the chat.
Yeah, 100%.
Give it a couple of more minutes and then we'll close it off.
Excellent. I'm leaving the QR code. Hopefully it's working okay. Just if you've got anything you want to share with me, I find it's always really helpful.
Cool. I have a question.
Yeah.
How do you better prepare yourself for the question section? So, like, Because sometimes I know you get like unexpected questions that are not like necessarily super related.
Yeah.
And yeah, that part makes me
No.
nervous.
It's really it is hard. It is one of the trickiest bits of the presentations. And again, I think it's just trying to, trying to think of the information that you do have at hand and trying to draw from that in order to provide an answer that is reasonable. Again, even when giving the presentation about the kelp project to the public, it was strictly about, species and organisms. But because you say you're marine biology and because you're working on something marine, everything always goes down to pollution. It's like, well, but what about the pollution? But what about the algal blooms? And what about this? And what about that? And the reality is that, you don't want to lie. You don't want to say, oh yeah, algal blooms, blah, 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 blah. And then it's something that is completely like off the rocks. And I think it's okay to say, look, I'm really sorry. This is an excellent question. Unfortunately, I'm not an expert about algal blooms, but if you're really interested, we can find someone who can be an expert or someone who might be able to get an answer, or I might be able to look it up because like thankfully we are in a field where we are able to look for the answers ourselves, because you might just have to give it a quick read of a couple of different papers and you can say, send me an email, I'm very happy to have a look, and then I can provide you the answer. But I think it's really important to try not to lie, and just be honest, and that's okay. And yeah, when you say a marine biologist, be like, oh, but what about this like tiny little things that live to the bottom of the sea? I'm like, I don't know. I have no idea. And I think that's okay. So just it's going to be a matter of, but that also comes with practice. Once you start going through a bunch of rounds of slightly random questions, and then you're like, oh, well, okay, now I can prepare myself a little bit more on how to answer them. But sometimes you don't know, and that's okay. Yeah, I had a student, every single lecture that I gave, they came up and just asked me some random stuff. It's like, oh, but what if I put like a pear tree and an apple tree together? What's going to happen? I'm just like, I don't know. I don't know about trees. As I can just about know enough about sharks and probably don't know enough about sharks to call myself a shark expert, but you're just like, okay, but maybe let's go and find the person that does work on plants, and then we can ask them and see if we can find an answer together. Yeah, sorry. I know it's not fun sometimes, but I guess it's just trying to do your best. And hopefully they'll remember you again for the person that has provided a great presentation, even if you didn't know every single thing that you were asked.
Thank you.
No worries.
I think that's really good tips. I've pulled a couple of times in some sticky situations. Wow, that's such an interesting question. Let me get back to you, and then just continue on, because it's if you keep it flowing. And I also think coming with confidence in what you're saying, like even replying to their question if you don't know with a positive tone or like a confident edge, I think can really make a difference. And then like don't not address it, but also keep moving with other questions and keep moving forward, and not like pause, I think sometimes, and make it a big moment, if
Yeah.
that makes you uncomfortable. Like keep the flow, um, and that's I think has worked for me before as well. In like you always get weird questions, but you can never really fully prepare for anything in life and any presentation.
100%. Yeah,
So
no.
you have to sometimes just, like you said in the beginning, Valentina, like wing it a little bit and just see what you can come up with. But I think always going with confidence and being positive is great. It gets you where you need to go.
And it is a complex, we live in a complex world and nature is complex. So you can say, nature is really complex. Like based on the information that I have on the topic that I'm an expert with, I can tell you this. Obviously doesn't fit necessarily with what you're asking for, but we can try and find an answer. But yeah, sometimes you're not going to know, and that's okay. Does it make you any less of a good speaker, or any less of an expert of what you're an expert in, even if you don't know the answer to that question?
Perfect. If there's no more questions, then I think we'll round it off here. So just want to say a really big thank you, Valentina. Thank you for offering to do this workshop. And yes, we already have next month's booked, I think. Actually, maybe it's for the 25th of November as well. But obviously we'll start putting our promotional material together for that and get it on our socials. So look out for information on the next workshop. But Thank you again, Valentina, and thank you everyone for joining
Thanks
us
so
for
much. Thank you so much for coming. I appreciate it. I'll see you soon, hopefully.
Yeah, have a good
Bye.
evening, everyone, or
Bye.
morning, day.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.